I'd like to say a welcome to everyone for joining us. This is our third meeting this month, which is some kind of crazy record for us, especially in these crazy times. And we have the privilege of being joined by our affinity group in Agile, Rhode Island. So I'd like to introduce you to Sue Harkins or Barbara Reed. If one of you ladies would like to talk about Agile, Rhode Island, please go ahead.
Hi, Steve. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara. And Sue, if you want to give a wave. Cheers. We are a similar group that works at Rhode Island. When we were together pre-COVID, we used to see each other in 3D. I'm sure you guys had some of that as well. But like everyone else, we have converted over to a virtual way of working. We typically meet on the third Tuesday of every month. Of course, you are more than welcome to join us at any one of our meetings. You can find us on Meetup right now, and we do have a website that is sort of under construction. It is agilerhodeisland.com. Thank you. There's our logo over there on the left. So we are very excited to just partner with you guys here, and hopefully we can kind of do this on a regular basis. I think it's great. Just kind of spreading the love and getting to know more people and seeing new faces. I think it's great. So that's all I have. Actually, I'll mention our next meeting on January 18th is on open space agility. So that starts at 6 o'clock. And if you're interested, I can send you the link or put the link in the chat for registration, which is up as of today. So thank you for the time to just say hello. Nice to meet everyone. Sue, did you have anything you want to add?
I think you covered everything great. Thank you,
Very
Barbara.
good. Yeah, and we also have Dorothy is also one of our kind of co-leaders here. She's on the call. And there's probably maybe Doug's here as well. But if not, there's a few of us.
Down in Rhode Island. Yep.
Around there he is. There's Doug. There's Raven. Okay, good. So there's at least 4 of us here. Forgive me if there's more. I don't see any other names here. So thanks again.
Great. Thanks, guys. We're happy to have you in this collaboration for this meeting. So those of you that are new to the group, Agile Hartford is also a licensed user group by Scrum Alliance, Agile Alliance, Agile Leadership Network, all those good things, as is Agile Rhode Island, I believe. So we are your go-to place for agility in the Hartford area. Let's move forward, Dave. So here's our board. So this has been our board for a couple of years. So this is a great group of people to work with. I really appreciate everything that they've done for Agile Hartford, for our user community, and we look forward to having another great year in 2022. So there's myself down in the lower left, Steve Nunziata. Not so fast, Dave. Vince Sukraj, Dave Kiersnowski, Janet Custer, and Larry Bach is our man in San Antonio. Here's how to find us. So there's our Gmail account. You can always reach us at agilehartford@gmail.com. We have Twitter, we're on the gram. We have a LinkedIn user group, and we do have a YouTube channel where we post the recordings of our events. So you can always refer back to them if you have questions or if you miss something. Feel free to jump into YouTube. Just look for Agile Hartford and subscribe to the channel, and you'll get notified when a new video posts. So at the conclusion of the meeting, you'll get a survey and just help us improve as a user group. What can we do to help support you? You'll get that about 7 o'clock or so. And if you wouldn't mind, just let us know how you feel about the event and how we can improve. So tonight's sponsor, and has been our sponsor for most of this year, is Eliason Group. I don't believe Diane or Rich are on the call. But they are happy to sponsor this group at every meeting. They sponsored our event last week down at City Steam, live and in 3D in person, which was a great event. And they look forward to continuing this partnership and collaboration in 2022. So again, thank you to Eliason Group for being there to support us. So we're working on our tentative schedule for Q1 2022. This is all, as I said, very tentative. These are the folks that we've reached out to for the topics that you see here. More information to come as we confirm speakers. I'd say right now it's January 19th. That date looks to be in a little bit of jeopardy right now. We're trying to find an alternate date for our speaker. And we're also trying to lock in our February and March events. And we will post that as soon as we have confirmation. So an exciting slate of speakers and presentations coming up, and we hope you will join us for one or all of those. So this evening's presenter really needs no introduction. Dave West, as I'm sure you all know, is the CEO of Scrum.org. David's a frequent presenter, and he's always done his presentations are of great value. Those of you that have seen him speak in person or virtually know what I'm talking about. So really am appreciative that Dave is here to join us tonight for our final event of 2022. And with that said, Dave West, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about increasing the velocity of value.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, and hello, everybody. Wow, yeah, 2021 is almost in the rear view mirror, right? So this is my last presentation of the year. So hopefully, I guess if my gran was here, she'd say, "Don't muck it up, David." So I'll try not to. I'll try not to muck it up. I'll try to deliver some value when talking about value. Nice pun there. And thank you for inviting me. I very much love speaking locally, even though I know we're via Zoom. And over the next 45 minutes, hour, we'll have an opportunity, I think, to explore some of the interesting dynamics that I see a lot in organizations as they use Scrum and Agile frameworks to do work. And I'll put that in the context of something that I've seen over the last 20 months since the pandemic really took root in the world, and some of the changes I'm seeing in organizations that accompany that when thinking about value, when thinking about alignment, when thinking about mission, when thinking about goals, objectives, etc. So hopefully I'll be able to share some of those insights as we go through today and share some fun as well. And I'm not quite sure I'm quite as smart as most Monty Pythons, but I'll at least try to make it a little bit interesting. I'll do my best. Oh, sorry. So that's me. Yes, that's my photo. I use it everywhere, passports, wanted posters. I was obviously a lot younger then, though the haircut, sort of keeps it. The great thing about being bald, right? Your haircut doesn't give away when it was actually taken, which is amazing. I work for another bald chap. He actually says he's not as bald as me. That's his one claim to fame. Ken Schwaber, based here in Boston, co-creator of Scrum, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, I am the product owner for Scrum.org. And you can imagine what it's like having Ken come to your sprint reviews. Yeah, it's an interesting experience. That's for sure. Scrum.org, 350 trainers all over the world, certifications, professional Scrum Master, all of that stuff. Not going to, all of that. So I'm not going to go there. Now, I'm going to put some context in it. Now, excuse me. Some people like BTS and boy bands and Backstreet Boys and the like. Some people, are big fans of trains and other things, or support the Red Sox. I like economists, and a particular economist I particularly like is a lady called Khalida Perez. She's Venezuelan, but works out at London School of Economics, and she's pretty awesome. Her books are hard to read. Her presentations are much more accessible. She's a very interesting economist because she talks about technology ages, and she believes, and you may not believe this, but she believes that we are in the fifth age of technology since the Industrial Revolution in 1771, which obviously started in England and the like, and continued in England until the Americans took over, sort of like towards the end of the 1800s. These ages are really interesting because what I've been using the work that Khalida provides to give me really a barometer or a yardstick comparing to previous ages, what's happening in the world that we live in today. So the thing that we're seeing today, I believe that the pandemic was the final push to move into what she calls the deployment age of the deployment phase of the digital age, which is hard to say, particularly at 6:45 on a Wednesday night. So the sort of this explosion of digitalness throughout the world, an explosion in terms of well, she talks about it in terms of the numbers of sectors that are using this technology, the number of organizations using it. She talks about a movement from financed capital, so the investment in digital predominantly provided by VCs and the like, to production capital. So basically the large organizations, governments investing in the deployment of these ideas. Now, the reason why I'm interested isn't because I'm particularly interested in digital as a thing. I'm very interested in the connection between digital and the ways of working that accompany it. And I have to say, they tend to be agile in nature. And it's no surprise, you know, when we look at the impact and knowledge work of digital technology, the numbers of opportunities that digital provides and the way in which we work, coupled with our lack of understanding of our customers in the use of this. I also look at why Agile doesn't work in many organizations as this friction point. They sort of do Agile, but they kind of don't. And those friction points are really illustrative of the previous age, which designed many of the organizations we work in. Really, the previous age working, you know, friction against this new age. So we've got this rub. Now, I would argue and I would assert that organizations now are starting to appreciate that. You know, there was an interesting study McKinsey did that they didn't particularly release. I saw it in kind of beta form and they were like, "Ooh, pull back from that." They have this model where they describe organizations of 7 layers of hierarchy. And so you've got level 7 is your C level, you know, your very senior managers, level 1 being somebody on the ground, you know, in a call center or manning, you know, or, you know, working as in an airline or whatever, in a plane, actually delivering drinks, etc. And there's traditionally 7 levels. Now, some organizations it's bigger, some organizations it's smaller, but they say 7. So they do studies every year on the communication flows between those levels, and, you know, when do they go from level 1 to level 4, and what is the nature of that, and how often is it, and what percentage of communication, etc. So they did a study during the pandemic, and they've done it twice now, and they discovered that actually what they were seeing is a flattening of organizations in response to this rapid changing environment that they're working in. So they saw that levels 1 and 2 for the first times, or were increasing the amount of collaboration with levels 6 and 7. And that 3s and 4s were particularly hit by this and were sort of not being pushed out, but being less, they were talking amongst themselves, but they weren't necessarily engaging more with the other levels around them. Sort of interesting and illustrative of the changes that we're seeing throughout the world. Looking at just scrum.org in particular, we have about 1.2 between 1 million and about 1.5 million people come to our website every month. When you look at that, when you do some random samples, when you pop up that little, "Hey, can you give us some feedback" thing, you know, that thing that's really the most annoying thing in the world. When we looked at that and we asked people who they are, what their skills, historically we saw 70-80% working in technology. We're now seeing that number drop to just high 50s, which is interesting unto itself, because it seems that more people are coming to Agile from a different context. You know, British Petroleum is a great example of a large organization doing a huge Agile transformation. I think that's public knowledge, and they present often about it. And what's interesting is that Agile transformation isn't just in the technology part of the organization. You've got oil rigs in Angola, you know, doing it, or on the Gulf, you know, where Larry is in Texas, you know, we see, it'll be Houston, but you can see that they're actually starting to use Agile approaches to better manage safety issues, etc., which you wouldn't imagine. Why they're doing that? Because they're doing that because the sheer number of change, the sheer amount of change is really driving them to work in different ways. So when this sort of like major moment, I think, in terms of the working practices that Agile is part of. And I think that's really exciting. You know, some of the characteristics of this new age, and value comes into this. So this is going to provide some context when I start talking about value that's so important. You know, short-term planning horizons, well, planning, actually even planning now is almost impossible, right? What with Omicron, which sounds like a transformer. It's almost impossible to plan effectively. We run face-to-faces throughout the world. We normally do about 12 face-to-faces, you know, physically face-to-face. We obviously went virtual. The question is, you know, we've put some on the books. We're now trying to work out whether that's going to be possible. You know, planning is almost impossible in this modern age, certainly long-term planning. So you tend to focus on clear goals, long-term goals, mission, you know, maybe even a product goal that drives us in a certain direction, but you don't plan longer than a month or two, really, in terms of any level of detail. Customer and product alignment. You know, we've seen over and over again a significant change, not just to product, but to customer. Value streams are becoming more and more a common sort of parlance that we describe. Teams are moving away from being component teams aligned to applications and architectures in the technology world to more cross-functional teams aligned to customers and outcomes. Line of sight of customer is becoming so much more important than it ever was. And to some extent, that is connected to the next thing, which is this efficiency versus abundance or growth mindset. We see over and over again organizations that are so worried about ensuring that their resources are maximized and that you have the smallest amount of, you know, sort of like communication pull on a particular team. And so we're moving away from that. We see those organizations basically not being as effective when the world is changing around them so much. And of course, cross-functional teams, self-organization, decentralization, and then the importance of the creator. The last technology revolution that sort of like moved into the deployment phase in the late 40s, early 50s after the Second World War, management, the sort of like the management became king, right? It became this very, very important sort of fundamental change. And each industrial revolution has really reinforced that. We're seeing a change now, you know, the rise of the creator, the fact that your managers will be paid less probably than your full stack developers, you know, that we try to build environments where we nurture the creators in an organization. And managers, though important, their role changes to be focusing on creating the environment to be successful. So the world is changing. You know, we see this over and over again. Over the last 20 months in particular, that this innovation cycles, the fact that we have to redesign how the experience, the engagement, we have to look at our products differently, we have to look at our markets and our customers differently, we have to instrument to get rapid feedback, the loops of feedback have to be reduced in this modern age. So, you know, no surprise, that means most organizations are going through a process where they better align around their customers, where they take all of the great work that we've been doing around in the technology space, in particular DevOps and the impacts of those, frequent delivery sort of culture, and this sort of agile mindset that we've definitely developed in the technology part of the business, and put that to work across the whole organization. They've started really challenging some of the status quo of those organizations. So, to quote the Agile Manifesto, though this picture is a lot more disturbing than when I actually put it in, I didn't think it would be as disturbing as this. Oh. Anyway, so I apologize if tonight you wake up in a cold sweat and this sort of like picture is in your head. I am not responsible. I blame Getty Images. Anyway, delivering value to customers is our #1 priority. Well, yeah, haven't we been doing that all along? And this really is an interesting point. And I'm going to tell you a little story. I was in Brazil before the pandemic, about, I guess, 3 years ago now, São Paulo, which is an awesome city, particularly if you like sitting in traffic. The food's amazing. the crime's a little bit scary, but apart from that, it's an amazing place to go. And I was going there to speak at Agile Brazil, and which is very exciting. But because it's such a long way and such a pain to get to, you know, and et cetera, I said to the local trainers and the organizations, our partners in that market, I'd like to go for a week and visit lots of customers. And they were very gracious, you know, in spite of who I am. They encouraged me, and we actually did a lot of visits, and we really packed the agenda. And after the first day, I was sitting at dinner, which was fabulous, by the way. And the food is just out of this world in Brazil. And I was sitting at dinner, and I felt a little bit off. Now, you may consider that it was jet lag, or maybe that 6th beer I had the night before, but it wasn't. I'd visited these clients, and I'd seen some great Scrum happening. Some amazing Scrum happening. You know, there was velocity, burn down charts. I can't speak Portuguese, but I had a translator, and lots of the stuff was being done in English in the large companies that we visited, which was also surprising, by the way. Anyway, so I was sort of picking up, and I asked a few questions, and I feel a little disconcerted. I don't know quite what it is. Then I realized, you know, I'd actually visited a couple of organizations and seen their daily scrums, and I'd visited one organization where there was a sprint review happening. And they'd invited me in very nicely, and, and translated and helped me and got me lots of coffee to keep me awake. And I realized that there was something missing from all of this. I felt there was something missing, and it was the customer. There was great burn down charts on the wall. There was great Scrum boards. There was great Kanban boards. There was, you know, cumulative flow. There was, you know, aging. There was all sorts of really interesting stuff, even flow metrics, but the customer was missing. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. So the next day I started this sort of like journey of discovery, and I started asking questions around the customer and the mission, the alignment, who comes to your sprint reviews, how much engagement. And I found a very worrying story that kind of depressed me a little bit about Scrum. And I was all excited about Scrum because, you know, we have such a big imprint in the world. But it was a bit like when I was the RUP product manager and I visited State Farm, and gosh, these are going to be on YouTube, so I probably shouldn't have said that. A large insurance company in the middle of the country. And they were using RUP, and they were doing a great job. Awesome people, really friendly, really cared about their business. And I was the RUP product manager, and I went in and I was talking to them, and I said, oh, what do you do? And this lovely lady. And she goes, I'm a use case specifier. My friend over there is a use case realizer. I was like, oh. I realized that RUP had actually taken away their lives, really. It destroyed them. Instead of actually being aligned to the customer, being part of a cross-functional team, working, having fun, delivering value, this person had been given, you know, a task and a very clearly defined role and a connection to the team and all that, but it wasn't adding any value. And I had that moment which kind of was like, really, is this, you know, and is this happening anyway? And so that led me to this sort of this quest, and it's not as bad as perhaps I thought, which is good. And I think some of it was jet lag and Portuguese, but I started on this quest, and it had some impacts. That Scrum Guide updates last November that you may be all aware of. I didn't make them. Ken and Jeff obviously made them, but I maybe nudged and encouraged and bored them to death until they gave up to make some changes. So everybody's focused on value, yeah. Everybody's focused on the customer, yeah. But then why does everybody have a different measure of what good looks like, what success means in terms of the outcomes? How often do we talk about outcomes at sprint reviews? Why are there no customer personas pasted over the wall? Why don't we talk about the impact of that customer? Why is measured success being task complete? Why do people spend every daily Scrum, you know, sort of like focused on that? Why is only a small group of person, or even worse, one person, the product owner, the only person that's allowed to liaise with the business? You know, why do product backlogs and sometimes not include things that describe the outcome that we're trying to achieve? Why do we care about velocity of work when really all we should care about is velocity of value? Why are there no customers at sprint reviews? You know, the less go. And why is it so damn hard to define a sprint goal? And that's perhaps another story that we can lament with respect to the idea of a sprint and the constructs around that. But so I was like, what is happening? And Scrum, amazingly, it's being used by about 14 million people every day are using Scrum in some way, shape, or form. Well, I see this, the work backlogs, teams where the product owner really is a project manager and managing the team and refining the backlog. The backlog is just a collection of work which comes from some other magical process that decides value. So it could be an ordered collection, but it really comes from maybe some sort of other process, as it were. The definition of ready, which I was a big fan of until very recently, when I realized that the way to cheat productivity is have a very, very precise definition of ready, right? Because you only allow things to move into the sprint that are well formed. And if they're not well formed, you say, oh, you're not ready. And though the intent of that is ridiculously good, because of course you only want to work on things that are well ready, it doesn't, you work on things that are the simplest, perhaps, the best defined. When surely the power of Scrum and empiricism is to work on the things that are the least defined, that give you the most value. Isn't that the essence of what we're trying to do? And that means that we're going to have some sprints where we fail. And those sprint reviews are just nasty because people go, oh, no, that's not what I meant. But that's how we get innovation. That's how we get breakthrough thinking. The lack of a sprint goal. The sprint goal is do all the tasks in the sprint. The fact that the daily becomes a status meeting, the fact that the management come to review the sprint at the sprint review, and then the things that are finished, the increment disappears off into a much bigger process that releases it. And then obviously we sit down at sprint retrospective and say, how do we get faster? How do we do more story points? How do we increase quality so that so we don't have to redo those stories and then get sort of negative productivity? These sort of questions on first glance look really good, but are they? Are we delivering the most value? And I think we all know why value is so important, right? We all know, and of course you're going to say, oh, well, Dave, one man's value is another man's work, right? That old adage that your grandparents told you. And you are right. The industrial paradigm, the idea is don't talk, just code, right? That classic Dilbert sketch when IBM decided, and I don't know if it was IBM, but I think it probably was. IBM decided the best way of increasing productivity of developers was to actually measure the lines of code they produced. So a lot of people walked out that day and wrote themselves a minivan or a trip to Bahamas. If somebody else has decided what the work is, and your job is to do it, then surely by doing the work, you deliver the value. Maybe, but we live in a complex world. Complex means by its very nature that we don't necessarily know what we know until we know that we don't know it, if that's another saying that your grandparents may have used. Working on value or stepping up is important. And, I obviously picked two, I picked two writers. It's just I can't help but hear Dave Snowden's voice, the Cynefin guy in my ear, the sort of nice Welsh baritone saying pseudoscientists like Simon Sinek and Daniel Pink. Well, maybe they are pseudoscientists, but they say a lot of sense, and pseudoscience maybe is fine with me if it helps me understand the world a little bit better. So there's two books there, Dan Pink and Simon Sinek, that really talk about this in detail, but in terms of the why, in terms of autonomy, mastery, purpose, right? Purpose helps us motivate. What's interesting though is that perhaps the most important reason why value is so valuable to a team, it gives a team flexibility to deliver different solutions and outcomes. And this reminds me of a story about right at the start of the pandemic, the Broad Institute in Cambridge just needed to get their scientists tested. And that was before we had this platter, this massive amount of different tests for COVID. There was very few on the market, but they're a genetics company, right? They like sequence the human genome or something equally as famous as that. So what they did was, a lady there, a Scrum Master, an Agile coach there, built a team very rapidly and delivered a solution that allowed them to test. The reason why it's so pertinent to me is my son at that point is in pre-K, and the pre-K stayed open because they had access capacity and they could test frequently. And any parent with a 4-year-old during the pandemic realizes that getting them in an environment away from home with other children is life or death at times. It feels that way. So now the solution that they ended up picking meant they made many choices along the way. They had a very clear goal, and they cut the suit to suit the cloth. There's some things they just couldn't do in the same way. They didn't build necessarily a fantastic privacy system. So they said, okay, so we can't know the customer, because, you know, et cetera. So we'll do this. You know, they did things differently. And any team, you know, when you're given a problem instead of given a solution, it's amazing how creative many of the people that are on this call are. It's amazing what you can get from that. The other thing that's really, really important is self-management requires guardrails. Self-management requires direction. Self-management requires vision. So without purpose, it's very hard to self-manage. The other thing that's really interesting is about the customer. Scrum does not mean the product owner is the only person that deals with the customer. In fact, that's the worst thing. It is true that that accountability, no longer called role, of the product owner is responsible for deciding, making that choice around order, around priority, around what is the most valuable thing. But everybody on the team needs to have those skills to be able to help that product owner make that decision in an informed way. So that means that building relationships with the customer, understanding the market, asking questions of those personas, getting access to customers, emailing them, whatever, sending surveys, all of that kind of stuff is incredibly important for a team. So it's important to get value higher in that agenda. And I was so boring about this, I would say, or so motivated would perhaps be another way of describing. There's some changes to the Scrum Guide that was really, really important in my opinion. One change was there's actually a few, and I'll talk about the ones that are very obvious, and I'll talk about ones that are a little bit less obvious. So the Scrum Guide came out in November the 7th last year, an update to the Scrum Guide, and Jeff and Ken drive the Scrum Guide. They work with a large group of people that became a much smaller group of people after they started working with them. Anyway, that group of people helped them make decisions about, you know, the change to the Scrum Guide. And I actually think this update to the Scrum Guide has probably been the best. I've been involved in the last 3, and this was pretty amazing. And it was amazing for a number of reasons. Perhaps one of the most interesting parts to it was the fact that a lot of stuff got thrown out. It went from, you know, 19 pages to like 13-ish. In German, it's still 20 pages, but in all language, Spanish is actually less, I think. But so they reduced a lot of fluff. They kept things simple, which I think is incredibly important, particularly as we don't want a methodology when dealing with complex problems. We need a process that basically emerges out of how you're using it. So this is the minimal that you possibly can have. Anyway, so the one thing that's really obvious around value in the Scrum Guide update, the 2020 Scrum Guide update, was this addition of a product goal, a commitment to the product backlog. So the commitment to the product backlog is the product goal, you know, and that product goal, the sprint goal, is a commitment to the sprint backlog. That product goal is really the why. So the idea is that before you do anything, you need to identify why. Now, a product doesn't have to be a physical product. It doesn't have to be, it could actually be something less tangible. For instance, there's a company, the biotech company, genes and machine learning company. And their product goals are very clearly aligned. Their products are very clearly aligned around basically protocol problems like genetic pain or genetic blindness is a great example. They have a product and they're working on that. They've got a roadmap of how they're going to solve this, and they have a very clear product goal that I barely understand. There's lots of science talk in it that clearly sort of like says, we need to get to this understanding of these receptors and these genes, blah, 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 to get to this long-term goal. And then they validate that product goal. So they break down how they're going to deliver against that product goal. And then each sprint moves them slowly towards that product goal or changes it. There's been examples where the science basically undermines that product goal and the like. So a product goal really defines the direction we're going, the why, the context. And then the PBIs under it describe how they're the initial sort of first cut of how we're going to do that. And then each sprint moves a set of those PBIs, turns them into the tasks for that sprint, which moves us towards that. So clearly Scrum now starts talking about outcomes, which is really, really exciting. Sprint planning now includes an additional topic, which is why. Why is this sprint valuable? What are we trying to get out of it? So suddenly we're now got some things that make that transparent. Now, the great thing about Scrum, in my opinion, and obviously I'm very biased, so I apologize if you're like, well, that's a very biased comment, but it's about transparency. You know, I think the most important contribution a Scrum Master can make is to make things transparent for the team, for the stakeholders of that team, the product owner of that team, the organization that team works on. If you make things transparent, then you can effectively start understanding what's wrong, what's right, where we're going, what's happening. Now, by making the product goal transparent, by making it a first-class citizen, it means that you see the progress against it. So it's very clear. Now, how you make it transparent is totally up to you. Is it written as an OKR? Maybe. Is it written as a series of OKRs? I'm not really totally comfortable with that. I like to only be one. But anyway, depends on your situation. So that was added to the Scrum Guide, which is exciting and really does make a lot of sense. I said I'd say a few things about the things that were changed in the Scrum Guide that are less obvious. The removal of the development team is actually in part influenced by this, in my opinion. Now, obviously, I don't totally know the motivations, even though I've asked both Ken and Jeff numerous times. They always a little, shifty in their descriptions, or maybe I just don't understand them always. The development team was this construct in Scrum. So you had a Scrum team, which comprised a Scrum Master, a development team, and a product owner. The development team was responsible for accountable for delivering a done increment, right? And that was their mission. The product owner was responsible for defining value. This Scrum Master is accountable for 3 services, right? They serve the Scrum team, they serve the development team, they serve the product owner, and they serve the organization that Scrum team was working in. Now, that created this sort of tension. Product owner responsible for value, development team responsible to get it done. Now that on part sounds very healthy. So, but if you remove the development team, make everybody responsible for delivering a valuable increment, make the developers on the team very much focused on actually doing the work, owning the work as it were, and the product owner owning, helping determine the priorities. It reduces the complexity, and the Scrum Master is part of that team as well. It reduces the complexity of those accountabilities and makes it very clear that everybody is in it together to deliver value, even the Scrum Master. How many times have you been asked, where do you measure a good Agile coach or Scrum Master? Personally, I think that ultimately their success is determined by the value that the team delivers. Now, obviously, there's lots of other like leading indicators and lagging indicators around that. But ultimately, everybody needs to be in this to deliver the value to the customer. Everybody cares about that, in my opinion. Now, how do you measure the success of that? What do you put in terms of support? That's a whole different conversation. So the Scrum Guide really did make changes to make it more value centric. And I think that's illustrative of the fact that organizations and people are now starting to use Scrum more effectively, not to do work, but to align to customers and deliver a value against that. So what does all this mean? If you're a leader or you're, maybe a coach and you're coaching leaders today, I think there's some very clear things that come out of this. We need to really think about that alignment and that funding model. Try to fund in some sort of outcome-centric way. And obviously the most popular one at the moment is value streams, right? Align your customers to those value streams. Align your teams to those value streams. It's a little late for me. I'm normally in bed by this time. Put measures in place that are value rather than work-based. And that's not easy. John Doerr's amazing book about OKRs could have been a blog post, and all the examples don't really describe the best practice that he describes in the book, in my humble opinion. Obviously, he's an incredible, amazing person and incredibly smart, because it's so damn hard to build measures around outcomes, those key results. It's hard not to slip into thinking about deliveries and thinking about work and task complete. It's really hard to sort of like bring that to deliver measures, particularly if you're in a large organization where it's sort of a complicated process to deliver value to customers. So how do we measure people? And that is the question. It's much easier in a small organization. Set direction with vision and goals. Yeah. Now, people say, oh, of course we do that. But then I listen to these leaders, and they talk a lot about, well, this sort of very high level vision, but they don't make choices. They don't define the goals in very simple terms. It's very hard to often make them actionable. Build cross-functional teams that include all the skills necessary to deliver value. And that means it's going to be messy. It's not going to be efficient at times, but efficiency ultimately is often the enemy of value. And that sounds so odd to say, but out of the mess of being inefficient, amazing things come. And then make sure that the customer, the real customer, the business user, or you instrument systems to get better from the end users, make sure that they support and encourage the transparency. And I'll tell you a little story that was really worrying about a company that I'm not going to name because it is a bit of a worrying story. There was this company is doing Scrum. It's done some amazing things with Agile and Scrum. And I was at a big event that they organized with all their executives in the R&D function. And they were telling stories. And one of them told a story about Scrum that went wrong and the impact of it. So this team was formed. They delivered some stuff, an increment. They had a sprint review, and they invited correctly all the right stakeholders, and the stakeholders were not impressed. They were like, no, this is the wrong goal. No, you don't understand what we mean. No, and it was a bit of a nightmare. A bit of a show, a nasty show would be a description. It was a bit like watching my fabulous Leicester City play Man City or Chelsea at the moment. Not for the faint of heart, And guess what happened afterwards? Well, the leader, the executive that was overseeing this initiative, came to them and said, never, ever embarrass me like that again. Okay, that's great. And then he went individually and lambasted these people, particularly the product owner and the coach that was working with them. This could not happen. In fact, I'm not allowing you to meet those stakeholders again, he said. I guess what happened? Well, they did work. They carried on working. Slowly, people disappeared out of the team, found reasons to join other teams, applied for internal positions. The project kind of petered out. Now, I'm not saying we should have sprint reviews where it's a bloodbath, but I am saying that encouraging an environment where transparency, where that kind of learning is seeked out, is tried to be found, sorry, vocabulary, is crucial, because a bad sprint review can be really telling, but we try to avoid it. Now, there's bad and there's bad. Obviously bad where people are being rude to each other, no, we don't want that. But sometimes we're going to discover things in a sprint that the sprint review makes really apparent that really change our perspective. We learn something, right? And we need to encourage a culture that does that. If you're in a team, have a look at your backlog. Say, how does this contribute to the goal? Ask about what the goal is. Document it, put it on the wall, virtual wall. Put it in your mural. Put it, make it a PBI and put it on the top of your backlog if you're using Trello or Jira. Big flashing light. Write it on a post-it, stick it on your screen, and ask that question over and over again. Ken Schwaber, when I'm talking to him about the work that we're doing, for the first 3 years, and you'd think I'd have learned faster than this, so I'm a bit embarrassed to admit it. I apologize for this. For the first 3 years, he used to say to me, so I'd get very excited. I'm saying, we're adding this PSM2 class, Advanced Scrum Master class. Look at the curriculum. Look at the way we're using liberating structures. It's a very different experience. I'd go, that's great, Dave. How does it help with our mission? Our mission is to help people and teams solve complex problems. I was like, every time I'd bring work to him, he'd listen, and then he'd take it back to the mission and say, how does it improve the professionalism of knowledge workers? How does it help us solve these complex problems in a way that is the best it possibly can be? I was like, and is that better? If you've got these 3 things on the table, which one moves us towards that mission better? Ask that question. Do it in a non-annoying way, obviously, because you can't be that guy that every single meeting goes, what about the customer? Don't do it like that, hide it. But ask that question. Spend time on the persona work. It's worth the investment of a couple of hours work to really get together and talk about your customers. Actually, we did that today at scrum.org. Bit of an argument about learners, but we'll quickly move on. But that argument was good because it was valuable, because we have people, professional trainers in our team, and their view of the customer is quite different to the courseware developer types, And it's just interesting, how they think their motivations, and that tension is actually really interesting because it gives us the ability to ask questions and to form hypotheses and document those hypotheses and then challenge them. Invite people to your sprint review that you don't normally invite. Obviously spend some time with them, and this is where a good coach or good Scrum Master can really help, preparing them that they're not necessarily seeing perfection, that their job is to inquire, their job is to tease in a respectful and a nice way, tease out those questions, and ultimately think about the customer throughout. Now, we're all familiar with T's and pie-shaped and cone-shaped people, right? What is that thing across the top? I would argue that the key component of that thing across the top is customer and is value, a maniacal focus on delivering value to that customer. Now, when I graduated from university, I went to work for an insurance company called Commercial Union. It's no longer in business, and it was in the city of London. And then, unfortunately, there was an incident. They blew up our office. There was an incident where our office got blown up, so I moved to Croydon. That was the end of it for me. But I remember that I was a software engineer. I worked in an insurance company, but I really didn't care about insurance. I think I lost out there, and I think they lost out, because I think if I'd have learned more about insurance, I'd have been a better contributor to the team. If I'd have asked those questions around, why does the customer want this thing? If I'd have built those relationships and thought about it, instead of taking those specs and just implementing it, I think we'd have built a lot better products. So is this a change in focus? I think it is. We're talking about requirements, moving to outcomes, vision, measures of success. We're talking about plans turning into more of a collaborative roadmap kind of implementing model. We're talking about helping people, learn together and partnering on this rather than these clear separations of responsibility, and ultimately introducing measures that help us drive this transparency. It doesn't have to be a revolution. It really doesn't. And maybe you're fortunate that the work that you're doing and the situation you're in, you have clear line of sight of your customer. You're empowered to learn about that customer, ask those questions. If you're not, then just challenge how you think about work. There's always an opportunity to step back and say, why are we doing this? Would it be better to do something different? Think about that context. Think about that customer. Ask those questions. Encourage those sharing moments. And slowly move the team towards the problem and the customer that you're trying to solve, rather than the work that you're having to do. Now, I think those ideas hopefully resonate with you. Hopefully we've got some time for some questions. The last thing, one more thing, just to quote a certain gentleman from the Valley. We've been experimenting with trying to think about outcome-based measures. So think about this as OKR, a contextual OKR. There's two things, CV and UV, that are so important. The opportunity that we're trying to realize and the current realization of that opportunity. Think a little bit about that, but also think about time to market and ability to innovate. How fast are we getting those feedback loops? Can we reduce those feedback loops? Lean UX, we have a class on Lean UX now, because I think sometimes we aren't doing the most economic, and I know that I said move away from this efficiency mindset, but I have to bring it back for a second, because I don't necessarily think we're always doing the most economic and efficient way of getting that information to validate our understanding of value. And then how much of the work you're doing every day is about innovation compared to just keeping those lights on. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Hopefully this has been interesting. Hopefully it's entertaining. Had a bit of a tough sort of like a bar there. He's as funny as Monty Python. I'm really not. Though funnily, we did have a conversation today about Monty Python where we talked about Mr. Creosote, if you remember that from Meaning of Life. There's one little FF in after 8 mint, Mr. Creosote. And it was because dogs could eat themselves to death, because of the feedback loop from their brain to their, anyway, but that was the reason why we talked about it. Anyway, so, and on that bombshell, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see some faces. Let's have some questions and have some conversation, if you would like to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, David, just out of curiosity, I think a lot of us work for large organizations, large insurance type organizations. One of the biggest challenges we face to even the first edict around organizing around value is we still to this day are very much structured in organizational silos. There's still very much this business versus IT clash that we still see. So this is great, and it really helped reframe my thinking on how we approach the Scrum cycle. We have a long way to go, I think, in larger industries as far as being able to break those barriers and engender trust between the business and IT folks. So do you have any comments or thoughts on that something that maybe you've seen work or help?
I mean, two things. One, a sort of a saying that they use in science. Science only progresses one funeral at a time, right? I think there's one thing that unfortunately change is going to require, there's going to be some changes to drive some of these changes. It's very hard for people that have spent 30, 40 years in an industrial mindset, working, thinking that the business, like insurance is a great example. Are we a technology company that does insurance? Are we an insurance company that has technology? I think that, the reality is you are a technology company that does insurance. The reality is that your value is determined by your ability to do technology, and they're intrinsically linked. And I think it's going to take a big change for many of those traditional companies to change, but it only takes an Amazon. You know, you look at retail. Look at the fact that where Walmart is investing all of its money at the moment. It isn't in stores. It's in technology. It's in this hybrid selling experience that they're proposing, and they're getting really good at it. And you know, you soon as an organization, so Tesla's moving into, interestingly, into insurance, right? In auto insurance. Organizations like that are going to drive a catalyst, because then there'll be a level of following that happens around that. But it is going to take time. So that's one side. The second side, though, which I think is perhaps a more practical rather than sort of philosophical perspective, which I just gave you, is really how you can change. Because yeah, it would be awesome if your business changed and brought business people into the meetings and started doing that. But if you can't do that, which you can't, perhaps, let's think about what we can do. We can frame things better. We know people. Let's ask them questions. Let's start instrumenting our software and our products and our systems to start gathering more feedback and more data. Let's start having a straw man on the wall that describes the customer. And then when somebody comes in just to say, hey, or just to say, you haven't delivered this and you promised it me, you say, hey, yeah. What do you think? Does this really resonate with you? Do you think this defines the customer? You know a surprisingly large amount about your business. Actually, honestly, probably as much, if not more, than your business do. Start describing the work that you do in that fashion. Stop hiding behind the veil of technology and start making it very apparent and getting things wrong. Don't be embarrassed to get things wrong. What's the worst that can happen? You know, it is funny in your types of organizations, you tend to not get fired unless you do something really horrible. If try some stuff, but do it with a smile, do it with no hubris, don't be rude, and try. So I think we have an opportunity to reframe how we present ourselves to the business so that they feel more naturally able to partner with us. Anyway, that's my perspective. I know it's easy for me. I sit in this nice little ivory tower and I potter around the world talking to people. The reality is hard, but I think a combination of those two things, the combination of the fact that organizations have to change, that people are retiring, that a next generation of leaders coming in, coupled with how we present ourselves to the business, will drive a catalyst of change, I think.
Yeah, so we can be the change too. It's up to all of us.
Exactly.
Great.
I mean, there is a third option, which I don't like and I wouldn't ever recommend it. Become the best IT shop in the world, and that's your business. That happens to have one incumbent insurance company. And then that changes and reframes exactly how you present yourself. But then that also means that you could get outsourced without too much trouble. So that's the reason why I think becoming more business oriented ourselves, coupled with trying to find those new leaders that are coming through your insurance companies, and they are coming, and there is change afoot even in insurance, I think.
Yeah,
very excited to see what happens when organizations like Tesla, I'm sure Amazon's going to do this at some point, or somebody like Amazon, when they start moving into the sort of because they got so much data, right? Just think how much data Amazon has of your house. So why wouldn't you do house insurance? I know exactly how hot it is, how many people are in there, how frequently. I'm getting all that data. If I'm driving I'm fortunate enough to drive a Tesla, and the amount of data, I met the head of product at Tesla. I was shocked by how much data they know about me. They know where I drive, when I drive, how I drive. I think they think I'm a drunken little old lady usually, because I'm not a particularly fast driver, and I stop often. But that's because I've got children. They have to go out for a wee and stuff. But it's just super interesting. I wonder what's going to happen when they really start moving into this market in the next year or two.
Other questions for Dave?
Sorry, Steve. I could talk for hours about that over beers.
No, that's a great response. I appreciate that. So,
any other questions or comments? I know it's Wednesday night before.
Actually, I have a question.
How do you incorporate?
Okay. Douglas, Joe, who wants to go first? Come on, wrestle.
Roger, one, two, Ed, you're jumping in first.
Go for it.
Cool. You mentioned that efficiency is the enemy of value. And one of the toughest things, whether you're a Scrum Master or a coach, is trying to get product owners to understand the value of teams spending a little bit of time with their technical debt. So I'm just wondering if you have any advice in translating that to some value for them.
Yeah, I don't know whether efficiency is really I just thought it was a really good phrase that came to my mind when I was speaking. I thought, oh, I'm going to have to get a T-shirt printed about
that.
No,
there is
something in it.
To that. There is definitely something in that. I absolutely agree with that, but
it's interesting about technical debt. So
yeah,
to some extent, I think it's incumbent on the technologists to position it in a way that communicates the business value of the thing that they're doing. I see too many. So we used to use, smoke and mirrors to sort of hide behind, oh, you don't, it's like the magic circle. I can't tell you what's behind the curtain. Just know that we're implementing a tri-dimensional database system using APIs and software-oriented architectures. And that's going to take 5 years and cost $10 million. And the business would go, okay, can I have my features? Well, you can, but So instead, I think we have to balance, right? Or maybe not balance. Balance sounds like perfection, and I don't think it's perfect. I think it's more harmony. We have to harmonize. And that means that we have to think about, fixing some technical debt, whilst delivering some customer value. And I had a personal experience of this when I was working at TaskTop. I don't know if people are aware of TaskTop, Mick Herson's organization. Yeah, a great guy, probably so smart, it makes my nose bleed when I talk to him, and I'm a very good friend of mine now. Anyway, so we had a problem. So we built this, so I joined from Forrester as the Chief Product Officer. Our mission was to get funding and actually build this integration hub to move information around the delivery chain of software delivery, right? And it was really, really interesting. And we built it based on Myelin and Eclipse technology, because that's what we had. And we sold it to BMW and some other big companies, right? Oh my God, now we've got a product that's actually got more debt than most South American countries. And we've sold it, and we have this vision, which the VCs bought into. Literally sleepless nights, a lot of challenges. Lost all my hair. No, it happened before, luckily, but would have lost all my hair. I was like, Jesus, what do I do? Got BMW going, we want this, we want this, we want this, feature. We got this roadmap, which turns out VCs don't give a damn about it. Actually, all they cared about was customers. But that I thought at the time that they really cared about this vision. And we have this product that's just like creaking at the. So I basically built a business case to basically re-architect, to build this test factory. Oh my God, even worse, wasn't even refactoring. I was building an environment around the environment so that I could effectively change the environment and know if it still worked.
Yeah.
So I'm like, Jesus, this is the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. Why don't I just do what any sensible guy does, is get another job anyway and leave. But I built a business case, and I persuaded every single stakeholder, including the head of sales, why this was the most valuable thing that we did. Then I said it was going to take 6 months. It took 10, and then at that 10th month, Atlassian, Mike Cannonsbrook, phoned us up and said, "Oi, can you test our APIs, because you do a much better job than us?" So suddenly now we have become the sort of gold standard in testing the integration between all these products. And we have this test factory and this environment, and we're incrementally moving the architecture to the next generation. And we delivered no new features for 10 months, really. We did a few little things, but most of my team was focused on that. But I did it by building that business case, and did it describing the future and painting this picture. And I am still surprised to this day that we did it. But it's an amazing, and because of that, you know, lots of great things have happened at Task Top, and they've moved on. Not just because of that, because of the amazing people there, probably not that. But it's just, I think you can do it, but you have to couch it in business terms, and you have to harmonize that work with the other business work and describe it holistically and build that trust. You know, I think we talked about trust. Steve talked about trust. Build that trust with the business so they understand, and don't hide behind the techno magic circle stuff.
Agreed. Thank you for sharing that, because that really, I think, will help a lot of people tie that value, you know, that it's not just IT, it's not just, the product has value, but so does, you know, reducing your technical debt and trying to do things in a different way.
But not if, so this is the old point, focus only on technical debt, building a perfect product that then is not going to be valuable in 6 months. So
Right.
The other thing that it does, that conversation unlocks, is the conversation about longevity and time and where we're going to be in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. I mean, obviously we don't know, but at least it gives you that conversation. The other thing, Rhonda, that I think is super important is I went and talked to everybody individually. I didn't just put it in my backlog and argue at a sprint planning or a release planning meeting.
Right.
I talked to everybody and spent time painting a picture, telling a story, creating some patterns. Actually, you know, we're massive pattern recognizers, right? So what I did was I found people and I asked them questions about their past, and then I found things that I could, you know, talk to them about that made sense in their context. And it was surprisingly successful in the end.
Thank you.
Even if it was 3 months too long, but that's another story. Sorry, there was another. Joe, you had probably an awesome question that I won't be able to answer. I'm a little nervous now.
I don't know if it's awesome, but I really appreciate this whole thing. This is great. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are on UAT and how to incorporate that into Scrum. If you have any thoughts to share about that, because that to me seems to be part of focusing on delivering for customers.
It is. And wouldn't it be great if we did it incrementally? Wouldn't it be great if we could rapidly deliver to customers in an environment that's, you know, pre-production, but that they could have time? Wouldn't it be great if we ran competitions to encourage them to give, it depends on your type of customer, obviously, to give feedback? Wouldn't it be great if we did A/B testing on stuff? Wouldn't it be great if we did all of that stuff? Wouldn't it be great if we understood risk, you know, that we could release features instead, you know, to production without really worrying about them? And we wrote software that it was defensive enough that it actually supported that kind of work, that we could roll things back. Wouldn't it be great if we could actually have a group of users that want to provide that kind of feedback? I think ultimately the world that I would love to live in is a world where user acceptance testing isn't about acceptance, it's about feedback. You know, it's not getting them to accept something, it's getting them to provide rapid feedback. And we're not worried about safety, we're actually worried about value. So we built our software in such a way that we can deliver it in a safe way. That might be to a small group and see how it works for them and then expand out. And we can actually release features that work together. All of these things, Joe, are hard to do, but perhaps the easiest thing to do is to move that UAs, that type of testing into the sprint so that you do it as frequently as possible, which then instantly breaks everything, because you're like, well, what about test data? What about environments? Who's going to do it? How are we going to do it? But those things that we break are good things because it looks at automation, it looks at provisioning, it looks at those DevOps practices that, you know, we all read about and we're like, oh, wouldn't it be nice? You know, it encourages that kind of behavior. And then over time, we can think about how we can better bring in users into the equation at a much more scalable way. You know, I think, I remember when I was building a software in an insurance company, we used to have this ridiculous pantomime called user acceptance testing, where they actually went through scenarios that we wrote. And I'm like, yeah. So of course they all worked. And, you know, they'd give some feedback like, I don't like that there and I don't like that there, but it was all pantomime. Instead, what I'd love to do is break it early, get their feedback, learn what the hell's going on, and give them something that's valuable later. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I guess in the sprint, ideally. Thanks, Joe. That was a good question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So Luke, you had your hand up. Did you have a question? Maybe not.
He's probably having maybe some sort of wrestling match with his children by the keyboard. That can happen at times. We all had those moments. Or when the cat walks across your keyboard in the middle of a presentation and wrecks everything. That's I think they do that on purpose, though. I don't totally trust cats.
They know. Oh yeah.
Yeah, they seem to have some sort of evil agenda, don't they, that we are only partially aware of. Any other questions or comments?
I guess I can throw one out since this is Larry.
Hello,
you
Larry.
mentioned about midway through the presentation that development should be, and I'm paraphrasing here, development should be a team sport, and we should measure a team's performance on the value delivered. Love that. How do you measure that?
Well, it really depends on the team, obviously. We talk a lot about that in EBM, evidence-based management, but ultimately, and obviously this is part of Steve's problem, right? That he talked about earlier with the fact that he works in an organization where the teams are aligned around the systems and the applications and the like. So it's hard to see the value that that team delivers. Ultimately, if a team is working, if somebody has funded something, there must be some sort of business outcome that is connected to that funding. Ultimately, the success of that business outcome is how we should reward the team, not in terms of promotion and stuff. This is the interesting distinction. This is very much the Spotify model. So a tribe, I know they don't do Spotify anymore and it's complicated, but so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But the tribe is aligned to some part of the Spotify value ecosystem, you know, whether it's, you know, artist payment systems, whether it's, you know, whatever. Anyway, so they have these value streams. A tribe is aligned around that. The work really, the investment, how big the tribe is determined by how much value that part of the value stream is determined to provide to the big organization as a whole. So that means you know how big that team is. That means, interestingly, you fund based on, not based on the work, you fund it based on the value that part of the business provides. And then they decide the priority of the work. So they pick the work that's the most important, rather than us trying to work out all the work that we need and then fund it upside down. So that's a really simple way. Now, ultimately, as they deliver value against that value stream, you reward them accordingly. So the question is, so if it's artist payments, it's, you know, maybe it's something around complaints from artists, you know, being sued. That's always a good one. You know, there's some dashboard that they have to build. So ultimately, though, if projects and teams are being funded, it needs to be clear why they're being funded. And if you can't measure the success of that funding, then why are we even doing it? And it's incumbent on the business and the organization to provide very clear outcomes, you know, basically OKRs that align to those teams. And it is hard, it's not easy, and it requires some changes. But modern, I hate to say this, I'm seeing increasingly organizations do this, and particularly the more modern organizations. And so, you know, it could be something as much as, you know, acquisition of customers, it could be customer, you know, it could be sales and the like. But suddenly, soon as you start putting those measures in, it drives a change in behavior, because suddenly the teams are like, hang on a minute, so our, you know, 10% bonus or our success or our win ratio, whatever we have, is going to be determined by a revenue number or a customer engagement number or a customer satisfaction number. Suddenly you get a lot more motivated people at meetings going, hang on, how does this help that? And it identifies two things. One, the metric's probably wrong, so that's good. So you're like, oh shit, maybe it shouldn't be. And then, or secondly, it really does get everybody worrying about the order of the value. And it can make the product owner's life a bit hard because you're like, no, this is really the most, no, I don't think it is. If I don't get my bonus PO, you're in serious trouble. And so it suddenly motivates them a little bit as well. I don't know, Larry, it's not an easy thing to answer.
No, but it helps. I mean, just the fact, like you said, basically you need to know going in what those measures are. Even if you have to invent them, everybody should be on the same page of what we're trying to accomplish.
Exactly.
And I think it goes back to another thing you said when you were the developer years ago working for an insurance company, but you didn't really care about the product. This would fix that. This will fix that.
Exactly. And just to make it like, so startups, great example, right? I had an engineering team at TaskTop when I joined, well, many years it was, and everybody cared about the outcomes. Everybody asked about BMW. Everybody, because they knew if we didn't do well, Larry, payroll wasn't going to happen. Right. So it was really easy to have those conversations. Now everybody brought their perspective. So sometimes those conversations, it was easy to have them. They weren't necessarily easy conversations because, you know, you come with a view and they're basing their views on the information that they have based on their interactions and their perspective and the like. And so it was one of the biggest challenges I had as the product owner sometimes was making my decision and holding myself to it, because I now had, you know, we were only small at that point, 20 or 30 people who all thought that they all had an opinion and cared. So it was a different set of problems. The other thing that we have to be very aware of is that, and this is a challenge, those initial OKRs and KRs in particular, the key results, the measures, as it were, could be wrong. So we have to have the ability incrementally to review and say, well, hang on a minute. We said that customer engagement was the most important thing, but what we've actually found was acquisition. We're acquiring a lot more customers and the business is super happy because of that. Is engagement really the right thing? And people have to be willing to change. And decision making in corporate America is not a big thing. We don't really like making decisions and admitting we're wrong. And that is something that has to change. They're willing. So we had a big argument in our community about product goal, right? A big argument in a community, that's always embarrassing. You know, these agile people, they like to talk, right? And so we're like, somebody said, how often does it change? And everybody's, well, very infrequently, it should never change. If it changes, we're wrong. I'm like, hang on a minute. Whoever the product owner defines the product goal, right? Or makes it transparent, he's accountable for defining it, right? Are they omnipotent? They're going to get it wrong. This is the best we knew at that moment, everybody. What we need to do is challenge it every sprint. And that's what we try to do. So that's the thing. We have to be acceptant that we're going to get these measures wrong. But what you said, Larry, I think hit the nail right on the head. Make something up and get going. And then if it's wrong, everybody's like, oh, Larry, you're an idiot. And you're like, great. Give me an alternative then. Oh yeah, we should do it like this. Brilliant. You've got that conversation, you've got that engagement with the business, and suddenly you're making some progress by getting something wrong. You know, I don't know about you, but I live in Newton, and the school system seems to be in England, C is a good grade. It's a passing grade. In America, if you get a C, you get like, people don't like getting things wrong here, do you? And hence the reason why most startups are run by immigrants. But the the thing is, getting things wrong is brilliant. I was a little bit contentious, so I moved quickly on. But getting things wrong is brilliant, right? Because we learn something. It's only if you don't learn that it's a bad thing.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you, Larry. And you were very insightful yourself, actually. I just sort of packaged it in an English accent, and it sounded great. Story of my life, really. Any questions, comments? Gosh. Well, thanks for staying. Thanks for coming the week before the holidays, as it were. Gosh, I was expecting just like 6 people, and one of them thinking this was a call about, I don't know, how to make the best gin and tonic or something. So I really appreciate you taking the time. It shows you the passion. And I was in Rhode Island at the weekend. Lovely. Had a fantastic time. Was at a party with the Stanley Cup and an opera singer. It was really a lot of fun. So thank you.
Nice. So we had about over 50 individuals joining tonight, so we really appreciate everyone's participation. And Dave, we sincerely want to thank you from everyone at Agile Hartford and Agile Rhode Island for joining us this evening. Very insightful, very impactful. Always a pleasure to have you, sir.
Thank you for inviting. Hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to you maybe in person. Though I was a bit annoyed that you didn't invite me to the drink up at last week. So and had the event there. I was like, you know, but I appreciate you inviting me on this cold Wednesday in December. So thank you, everybody. Have yourselves a great holiday period. Enjoy hopefully you'll have some time for rest. Maybe read a few new books, maybe get a few new books for the holidays. And I look forward to having great conversations with you in 2022. How did that happen? Gosh, no.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.